You can shoot the breeze. You can talk about what's life like.
Oh my God, Ronald Acuna just hit the crap out of that ball.
What are you doing? Watching TV on your computer screen? Other computer screen?
Nah, I've just got Twitter up to post the link, and I saw the clip. He hit the crap out of that ball.
Kansas winning too.
Yeah, they lost to Dallas yesterday, I think.
Overtime though.
Yeah,
My
yeah. Overtime losses are just like a whatever.
it's a win, right?
Pretty
You get
much.
1 point,
Pretty much, yeah.
but they love it. I enjoy it,
Whatever.
but I don't. It's a win. I don't love it. I don't need to watch every game, but playoffs in PNC are pretty insane. A
Oh.
couple years ago, it's nuts.
We changed the Twitter account, didn't we?
What do you mean?
Didn't the Twitter password change?
I don't. I don't use it.
Oh no.
Don't use it. Got too many passwords, man. Too many passwords for too many things. On the bright side, I'm the only person watching.
Watching what? Oh,
You
the
got, you
the
got
live,
one view. You got one viewer, and
and it's
me.
you.
It's delayed too, pretty good. Let's go. Let's watch this. 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. It's like 6 or 7 seconds behind.
Mhm. It's pretty normal.
We have 12 people. What you got in that cup?
Bullet rye.
Nice. Did you happen to watch Ross and Joey with Joe Barry?
Mhm.
That was pretty good.
I'm
I
just
had I had one question I would have asked him, and I told Joey.
what?
When Greg gets in, I'll ask it to both of y'all.
Okay.
We'll save it.
Okay, I tweeted it if you want to retweet it. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I shot a 53 on the front nine, and it was pretty brutal. And then I shot a 40 on the back nine.
Really?
Yeah.
You got to be careful in Headingham. You hit a bunch of houses.
Oh yeah, on the front nine it was rough.
I hadn't played since. I guess I played in late November, one of those warm days. I usually play in tournaments. Drag me out there to play in fundraising tournaments, and it's fun as long as I get free drinks and free food and stuff.
Quick shout out to my wife Annette. Hi Annette. Thanks for joining.
Kevin's getting on the good side early, huh? For those of y'all watching right this moment, we're waiting on Greg Barnes.
G Biggie.
You have to understand that
It's
the
not just
bus
Tommy and I.
the bus waits for Greg. The bus does not wait for anybody else. It waits for Greg. And I don't think Luke Buxton will be joining us tonight because he is celebrating
Being a senior.
being a senior.
I couldn't even imagine doing this entire school year the way they had to do it.
Trip, we will hit it all. Sort of be a button-up show for the 2021 season. We'll talk football, some basketball, and also look ahead a little bit. Greg Barnes is having technical difficulties, so he will be here shortly. So we'll talk about highs and lows of the season, both seasons. This is at least my idea on it. Highs and lows of both seasons. Um, and expectations where they met, where they not met. I'm going to make the lows Roy Williams' retirement not be allowed to be that one because I think everybody will agree that that was probably the main one. Um, and then we'll sort of peek ahead because I think one of the either Buck or Ben coined the phrase there is no off season at Inside Carolina, so there's a lot going on and a lot to talk about. And so, what do you mean? What happens after tonight? What does who
I think
do
that
going forward?
I think they're talking about live podcasts and things like
So,
that.
so just off the record, on the record, pontificating. Um, at some point, we will have Jason and Buck and Greg and discuss football over the off season and basketball, whatever comes up. We're not going completely dark, but this will be the last quote unquote on the beat live podcast. And if Gregory's available, we'll do them live. Simply because I don't know how to do it, and I'm afraid if I do it, I will do something that will either break the internet or get me fired. So
You're on a laptop right now, aren't you?
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's a little more difficult, but you can figure it out. Are you on a Mac or a Windows?
I'm on a 2012 Mac Pro, which I feel like it limps along every day. So
I know this. Yeah, you would not be able to live stream on that thing just because of its old. I mean, you could. It just wouldn't be.
and I do have smoking fast internet, but
Maybe
yeah,
your
I got like 400.
your computer might blow up.
And there's Greg Barnes. What's up, Greg?
What's going on?
Not much. I was just sort of telling folks on the YouTube chat what we're going to try to do in this show. Looking forward over the summer and all. Greg, just so you know what I was thinking, sort of a high and lows of the seasons, football and basketball, sort of button up the coverage of the actual seasons tonight and then look ahead a little bit.
Okay. Before we
And
get started, let me let me send a shout out to Daniel Atkins of Holly Springs, North Carolina, who carded a bogey-free 67 today in the SWAC Conference Championship to win the conference championship for Apex Friendship. So, heck of a round this afternoon. So,
nice. Was it out there at
good
your
to have.
place?
It was not. It was at Bent Winds and Fuquay Verena. So,
Nice.
yep.
Yeah, that's not bad for a high school kid.
Nope, not at all.
Well, Gregory was telling us he shot a 40 on the back at Headingham, his best 9 ever.
That's great. It's a good score.
I had a double bogey and a birdie and then 3 bogeys, and the rest were pars. I think that's
Great.
40.
Yeah.
Dude, I hadn't seen 40 in 9 years.
I shot 53 on the front 9 though, and I lost like 6 balls.
It happens.
I had to
Yeah,
warm up, you know.
So
Yeah.
did you hit Buck's house or not?
Probably I hit a few. I hit one, like my first 2 drives were beautiful. And then we caught up to the foursome in front of us, and I looked at my buddy and I was like, "Wait, they're gonna tell us to play through, and I'm
And
gonna
you're
hit my
going-
drive straight in the air, and it's gonna slice right off that house." And that's exactly what it did.
Yeah, when we first moved out here where I live, I had a buddy of mine and he was a little bit loose with the driver, and I had to tell him, "You got to put the driver up, man. These people are going to come to my house wanting money for the damages you're doing." Anyway, let's get it rolling. On the beat live. We'll start like we usually do. And I put the link in the general Slack, so if anybody else shows up, we'll let them in. Bear with me. And folks listening to YouTube chat, you want us to talk about something? Put it on there. Here we go. Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. I am your host, Tommy Ashley. That's Gregory Hall. That's Greg Barnes. It is On the Beat Live. We are live streaming on YouTube as we speak. Got a few people watching at the moment. Need more. Tell your friends to join the crowd. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, of course, sponsors of this show and great friends of us. If you're a premium subscriber to Inside Carolina, you, of course, got that 10% off. I told people on the day after podcast earlier, I guess Sunday morning after the spring game, I used it. Saved me some money. And I have no shame. I will use a discount anytime. It won't be long before I can use the senior one at the restaurants. Anyway, I digress. This is the last On the Beat Live regularly scheduled. So what we're going to do here is we're going to button up the podcast, or excuse me, button up the season, football and basketball. Carolina's got a big baseball game going on as we speak. I think they're about to lose it. But I'm going to start with Greg Barnes. Greg, Buck and Jason and I sort of rehashed the spring game on Saturday, which pretty impressive display of talent from North Carolina out there on the field, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We've heard Kadri Jackson is entered the transfer portal. I can imagine that that's not the only one that's going to come. Was there any surprise when you saw his name hit?
A little bit, just because he has been working a lot with the blue team, which is the ones. And it's one of those situations, the way this works, you have your starters that everybody knows that gets a lot of hype. And this year, that's Jeremiah Gimmel as well as Eugene Asante, having replaced Chaz Surratt. And then any freshman really, but especially talented freshmen come in and they get all the attention. But as we've watched these scrimmages throughout spring, while Power and Ra are clearly going to be good players, no doubt about that, they were still playing behind Cedric Gray and Kadri Jackson. So it's really one of those things where we'll have to kind of get more details. But was it a situation where the coaching staff said, look, these young guys are coming on, and so the playing time may or may not be there for you. We don't know that. It could just be that he sees that he's not going to be starting, and he knows what's behind him. And so if he doesn't get to play this year, he may not have that opportunity. So we can speculate all we want, but as you've mentioned offline, Tommy, Kadri Jackson is like the quintessential special teams guy, right? I mean, like a linebacker that can run, that can hit. Even if he's not playing on defense, those are the types of guys that you want on special teams. And that's the challenge that Mac Brown and his staff have. And that's the challenge all these coaches are going to have, is that because of the transfer portal situation, a lot of these guys who may not be your starters, but are probably going to be good backups, are they okay with that? Are they okay with being the standout on special teams without getting the recognition and the snaps during the games on defense or offense? How do you balance that? And nobody knows. And so all you can do, as we talked about, is be honest with these guys. Mac is doing that. And so Kadri decided to leave. I wholeheartedly agree with you. This is not the only one. There's going to be more, and I suspect over the next 4 or 5 days. We talk with Mac again next Tuesday. So I imagine between now and next Tuesday, there will be at least a number of other guys that make the same kind of decision.
Yeah, that's the thing with the free transfer and play immediately. Guys are like, in a normal year, I think he stays and he's a stud special teams guy, and then he plays after Gimmel leaves and maybe Asante. But now there's really no reason to, right? There's no reason to stick around unless you just love Carolina. And what people don't understand, and sometimes on the message boards, I think that people sort of think that Carolina's the be-all, end-all for everybody, and it's not for everybody. Guys need to make money. Guys need to play, and I think he's going to be a good player. I think that he showed flashes Saturday, and like we mentioned and you mentioned off the air, special teams took a hit today or yesterday or whenever he entered the portal, and I see a situation where it's going to take multiple hits, and then you're going to have these young guys like Ra and Power playing on special teams more than maybe they would have normally. Anyway, Gregory, your thoughts on that? I mean,
well, you mentioned special teams.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just somebody to look out for as we talk about competition and having conversations is a guy like British Brooks, who I believe he was the special teams player of the year last year, Greg, if I remember that correctly.
That sounds right, yeah.
They love him on special teams. He's a leader out there. He knows what he's doing. He's established. He's a veteran. Because special teams, I mean, yeah, they put some of the young guys and some of the guys who aren't playing, but it's still not something you can – it doesn't make it any easier than offense or defense or things like that. So you still need those veterans out there. And when you look at the running back competition right now, I mean, British doesn't necessarily look to be in those three guys, but he's good enough to be a running back somewhere if it's not in that top three at UNC. So he's a guy you kind of concerned about leaving because he is your special teams captain. And like Greg said, no one really knows how to balance that and what they're kind of going forward. So that's just a name that, not that I'm saying he's transferring anything, but it's just, if we're talking about blows moving forward, I think that would be a substantial one as far as if he doesn't get the running back reps that he wants, but maybe he's okay with the role he has. We can't make these decisions for these guys, and they probably don't even know what their decisions they're going to make and what's important to them either.
And this may be a conversation that we can have once the portal date arrives, July 1. But I think that's a good point with British. Now, British, I think, is the kind of guy that's going to hang around just because he is a Carolina guy, and he understands his role in being a leader, especially now this year. I just see him being the type of guy that will stick around and do everything he can to help the team. But so many football players, if you want to make it at the next level, you've got to be a contributor on special teams. Because you have to, there's only 53 roster spots at the NFL. And so if you're a backup in the NFL and you're not on special teams, you're not sticking on a roster. Mike Hollins is a great example of that. He was a walk-on, high energy guy, good speed. He killed it on special teams for Larry Fedora for a couple of years. And then he transitioned that over to a wide receiver. And that's how he's stuck in the NFL for however long he has. And a lot of guys like that. And so if guys are running or leaving a program just because they're not getting playing time, even though they could carve out a niche on special teams, how does that translate to the next level? And what does that mean for the next level? And we won't know until we actually see it, but I think it's an interesting part of this.
I think the immediate eligibility completely changes everything because, like I mentioned earlier, I think if it's a situation where you have to transfer and sit or whatever, unless you go down a level, then you stick around and you play special teams. Somebody may get hurt, and then you get your chance, and then you make your name. Somebody on the YouTube chat asks, is he the biggest name? Is Jackson the biggest name? Don't know. Have no idea if that's going to be the biggest name. And, the biggest production guy, I don't know, because he didn't really produce. I think also, Greg, and I wanted to ask you this when you guys were talking, is Bateman's way of playing his inside linebackers has a lot to do with this, I think. He doesn't take them out. Gimmel's not coming off the field unless he's carried off. And probably if somebody's subbed out, Asante maybe, but Gimmel not coming off. And if I'm an inside linebacker with some talent and an opportunity, I'm not seeing the field. And if I don't like the special teams aspect or don't want to bide my time there, do you think Bateman's way of not rotating that position specifically maybe had anything to do with anything?
Well, possibly. And I think the other aspect of that, to build on that, Tommy, is we've talked a lot this spring, because Bateman now has all these big bodies that he can actually use along the defensive front. You're not really going to be seeing Tamon Fox play a lot at end. You're not going to be seeing Kamon Rucker playing a lot at end. Those guys are going to be pass rushing specialists on the outside, primarily at outside linebacker. And because you do have so many talented big bodies, we're going to see a lot more of a traditional 3-4 because he can do it. He hasn't been able to do it the first 2 years. And that's why we really saw that hybrid, 4-2-5, whatever it may be, where maybe you only had one outside linebacker. Well, now because you can use Fox and Rucker and Chris Collins and Dez Evans outside linebacker, you're not going to be taking those guys off the field because you need a pass rusher. Well, Gimmel's going to play for reasons that you said, and because he's the leader of this defense. So now if you want to go to a nickel package and you want to get a Jacarius Conley or a Don Chapman on the field, well, where are you going to take a position away? It's going to be that second inside linebacker position. And so I think that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of, the snaps are going to diminish there in the middle. We made a big deal about Tommy Thigpen only having 5 guys there last year. Well, given how things are set up right now, roster-wise, they may only want 5 guys there now. And they may only need 4 guys. And so certainly that could have played a role as well.
And they've been high on Cedric Gray recently.
Yeah.
That's
He's
a
looked
name.
good.
He did. He looked great on Saturday. All those young guys did. Power, Cedric, Rah. I mean, Kadri had his flashes, Eugene. So, like, I guess maybe Kadri just kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit. Because, like you mentioned, they might only want 4. And it looks like it's Jeremiah Gimmel, Eugene Asante, Cedric Gray, and then Power and Rara Dilworth kind of fighting for those last spots. And Kadri was like, all right, that had to have played into his decision, right? But it also is interesting focusing on him is how quick it was. Because, I mean, he played on Saturday, and the transfer news already came out. I don't know when Mac was planning on having his conversations and meeting with his players, but it sounds like something either it was a very quick, rash decision or something been talked about for a little while.
Well, we received word not long before it was announced, and this is me guessing, but that leads me to believe that those conversations started Monday morning. And, we'll see. But, yeah, maybe it was a situation where he's been thinking about it. Again, this is all speculation. I haven't actually talked to him. But if it was a conversation, an honest, tough conversation with the coaching staff Monday morning, then very easily he could have been like, all right, you know what? I gave it a shot. Now I'm ready to move on. And that's that. But
And why wait?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, because the portal is packed already, and you don't want to get in the portal and then not have anywhere to go. And a couple of things I want to say. I don't fault a kid or a player for doing what's best for him. I definitely don't fault Jay Bateman for not rotating inside linebackers. I mean, especially the play caller like Gimmel. They got to play every time. And also, who I fault in all this is the NCAA, but that's another matter. But guys have to do what they have to do. And another thing, folks fretting about losing talented transfers. That's what happens when you have a ton of talent. I mean, Kyler McMichael's not on Carolina's roster right now. If Clemson didn't have the same situation, and to a lesser extent, Cam Kelly, that's what happens. If you want to have big time talent on a football team, you got to realize that your favorite guy might leave or your guy, they're not going to stick around and not play when they're really good.
And Mac Brown, I don't think, is of the same approach in terms of how he deals with things that Nick Saban is, at least publicly.
A lot of bad players leaving a lot of good teams.
Right. And there's a lot of truth in that. And I'm not saying anything about Kadri because we haven't seen him enough to know kind of his situation. But in general terms, a lot of truth in that comment that Nick laid out. A lot of people didn't like it. Just like Roy Williams saying, let's be clear about what opt-outs are, right? They're quitters. A lot of people didn't like that either, but because Roy is who he is and because Saban's who he is, they can speak frank.
Yeah, and if folks don't understand what Gregory meant, Nick Saban said a lot of bad football players leaving a lot of good football teams. So, it's the nature of the beast, especially these days. Let's transition to let's talk about the running back room a little bit. And quite frankly, that's been Gregory mentioned British Brooks, and that's been an area of speculation. I mean, I think we can agree that Ty Chandler's 1 or 1A. Greg, do you agree with that?
I think it's got to be right now.
Okay.
Not
they didn't
enough
bring
of the
him in
others
not-
have shown. Yeah, exactly. And not enough of the others have kind of run their way up there. Sorry to
and
cut you off, Tommy.
What has Max said repeatedly this spring about Chandler?
He loves him. He's been so impressed.
Why?
Because he can block.
Because he played in the SEC and he's played against LSU,
Tennessee's,
Alabama, right? And there's value in that for sure. But he's battle tested, and I think that's a big part of it.
And so, from my untrained eye, and somebody asked me who won the Bryn Renner Award.
I asked you that.
You did, but a bunch of other people did too. And I think it was probably Josh Henderson, to be honest with you.
That's what I was going to say too.
And that's the second scrimmage. He's looked really good.
And he did look really good. And
Sam Howell said I asked Sam, I was like, all right, who, because he talked to Oliver, I was like, Sam, who do you think had the best day? And he's like, probably Josh Henderson. That's what he said. And then he was like, I'm sure, and I mean, Sam was doing
Then
it.
he went
was
into
on the
PC mode,
sideline,
right.
and then he went into PC mode, and he was like, I'm sure Ty Chandler was impressive. You know what I mean? He was just like, I'm sure Ty was great, but those are the two guys he mentioned. I asked him, and he frankly said Josh Henderson, and then he was like, I'm sure Ty was great too.
And the one thing that I was going to ask you both about, and Greg, I'll start with you. If you've got a freshman and a sophomore, redshirt sophomore, or even a junior that are equally talented, who is the coach going to take? All things equal, except for the amount of years in the program, and you have experience already, who's going to be carried forward?
Yeah, I mean, clearly you're going to go with the younger guy, and the only thing that would stop you from doing that is roster management in terms of you don't want 3 freshmen running back and that's all you got.
Right.
So that's part of it. But yes, I mean, all things the same, you're going to take the younger guy every time.
And so, uh, I'd be shocked if Caleb Hood's not one of those guys getting major reps. I mean, he looked different at times out there, to me at least.
He's different for sure.
And what's crazy is he played Clayton last year as a quarterback um, in 2019, and they beat the dog snot out of Clayton, who's about to play to go to the state championship here. So just roughhoused a really good tip football team last year as a quarterback, and it was almost comical. But anyway, let me ask a question that popped up on the YouTube thing, and I think it's relevant to our discussion. The freshmen in 2020 got very little burn into the weight game. Any chance spring ball and the coaches better knowing how to handle COVID means we see freshmen taking more snaps early? Greg, I think that's
Yes.
a great question, and I think it's going to bear fruit. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that North Carolina had so many talented freshmen come in last year in January, and then COVID hits, and everybody went home. You don't have spring practice. You really don't have summer workouts. They did get an extra week or two for walkthroughs to make up for that loss. But when the freshmen are really just in training camp, trying to figure out exactly what they're supposed to be doing, it is going to take them a while to get in. And it goes back to what we've talked about so many times in recent years, Tommy. If you've got guys you trust, at what point do you sub them out for somebody who is raw and inexperienced? And the way you get them experience, yes, is to play them in games, but it also is spring. I mean, these guys have played 3 hard scrimmages, and there's value in that. And they'll play in more scrimmages in training camp. So while those aren't the same as live game action on Saturday, that's 6 scrimmage opportunities against really good opponents that gives the coaching staff an idea saying, okay, well, when the lights come on, we have reason to believe that this guy's not going to hurt us. And that's all they need to be able to let these guys loose. And so many difficult games last year, early in the year, it was such a small margin of error. You couldn't really rely on the young guys yet. And so undoubtedly, you're going to see a lot more young guys, especially up front, early in the year, maybe even against Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I mean, I think special teams, even with some attrition that they'll have, special teams are going to be ridiculous. A lot better, especially the coverage teams that you see. If you got guys like Dilworth and Power playing on that, they're going to significantly improve there. Let me ask you both, and Gregory, I'll start on your side. Give me one guy on defense from the spring that you saw covering 15 practices or however many they had and 3 scrimmages. Give me 2 guys that people will stand up and notice next fall and try to be different. I mean, you could say rah, Power, Javari, and if those are your guys, go ahead.
Kevin Hester on the line. He has really come along. He's gotten noticeably quicker, I think. I mean, he's a big body and he's powerful, but I think his first step especially with his hands on the. I mean, UNC's offensive linemen are big. They're big bodies. They're good and they're gonna be good and they're experienced. And he was able to kind of. I don't know how many times, I don't have a number, but he was able to handle his own and get by there and kind of show his quick moves to the outside and kind of cut inside and give him with his hands and shake him. So I think that's a guy. And then probably Jacarius Conley. It'll be interesting to see, especially if he's successful at safety with that movement and that switch. Just because when he's at nickel, he's all over the field. When you give him the kind of move him back and kind of the free reign of help moving around back there and being that last line, I just don't see many running backs getting past that last line of defense with JQ back there. He's so fast. So those are my two guys.
Greg, 2 players on defense.
I'm curious to see Don Chapman at nickel. It sounds like they really like that transition. We know Conley's going to be on the field. But Chapman has experience. I mean, he practiced at corner last year, played a full season at safety, and now they're trying him out at nickel. I think they're going to be able to use him in a lot of different ways. So I think that is interesting. And I think Chris Collins is the other one. We know what Cameron Rucker can do. We know what Tamon Fox can do. They need another pass rusher who can really disrupt things. And Chris Collins, he's getting snaps with the ones. And I know everybody loves Dez Evans because he's the 5-star and all that. And he's bulked up and gotten better, even though he was a little dinged up in spring practice. But I think Collins is the guy. I mean, this is a kid who looked really good as a freshman. Mac and them decided that, hey, he needs to get bigger so we can actually use him the way we want to use him. So he redshirted a year just for the sole purpose of packing on weight. He did that. And so I think he's the guy that's going to make some noise in the fall.
He's 6'5", 255. That is a perfect body to get around the edge and get to the quarterback.
Got to be able to dip those hips, though, and get around the edge. Is Dez Evans a 10-sack guy? That discussion was on the message board, and Jason has him as a over/under 9.5. That seems like a lot.
It seems like a lot to me too. If he is, then great for North Carolina. Tamon Fox is going to be a guy at outside linebacker. Just because he didn't practice much this spring because they know what they've got and they think he's going to be their stud for him. And we know what he's done sack-wise throughout his career. So now you're really talking about one spot, and you've got, as we said earlier, you've got Kamon Rucker, you got Chris Collins, and you've got Dez Evans. So that may be a position. We talk about the inside linebackers not rotating a whole lot. You may see a lot of rotation at outside linebacker just because they have possibly 4 guys that can be productive. But if you're rotating 4 guys, 10 sacks may be tough to get to.
And I think there's going to be a lot of half sacks because I could see 2 guys, especially because I know Mac and Jay Bateman have talked about not having to scheme sacks. But if you throw in the ability for their guys to take guys one-on-one and throw in the ability to scheme sacks, I could see a few times where 2 guys get back there that half sacks kind of taken away, and 9 sacks led the ACC last year. So, and Dez Evans first, if we're talking 10 sacks, he's most likely going to lead the ACC in sacks or at least be close to that.
Yeah.
And I feel like
short season last year and whatnot, but still.
I feel like the disclaimer is accurate. And whenever there's a lot of hype ahead of a football season, there's always hype going into a football season because everybody's undefeated in the offseason. Even more when there's reason to be excited. And so after spring practice, spring game on Saturday, 75 minutes, people are like, oh, yeah, they're going to play for college football playoff and 10 sacks here and 5,000 yards here. And I get it. It's fun, but
also
in the spring.
No punts and knowing you have 4 downs. There were times where on second down, the offensive play call was just whatever,
Eugene Asante literally walked through the middle of the offensive line for one of his early sacks. People were like, what a great play. Well, no, not really.
Yeah, he would have killed Chris Wheeler. It's funny. I asked, talking about how, and by the way, I have the over on Josh Downs at 1,250 yards, which, but I don't know
That's
who
a
else.
lot of yards.
Then I see him in a hospital bed with his foot surgically repaired. So, I asked Wes Durham on the Inside Carolina Live show, I said, is the hype justified from outside our bubble? And he said he thought it was justified, but don't let hype cloud your reality. And I think that was an interesting take because, you know, 10, 11 wins or more and all that stuff. I mean, like you always said, Greg, how many times has Carolina won 10 or 11 ball games? Ever? I mean, there's a lot of work to do. It's
They've
going to
done
be
it
fun.
5 times in 40 years.
It's going to be, and the thing is, Mac did it, a couple of those.
Yeah,
So,
3 of them.
it's going to be, it'll be a wild ride. And during the off season, it'll be fun. And I look forward to hearing Mac. You said next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Maybe we will convene and do this next Tuesday.
And
Should be interesting.
to build on Wes's point, what I hate and what I fear, I don't know, I think fear is probably the right word, is that because there's so much hype and the expectation level will be so high that Carolina could go 10-2 and people will be upset. And given what North Carolina has gone through the last 20 years, if you're not celebrating a 10-2 year, even if they stub their toe somewhere, I mean, what have you been a fan for 20 years? Like this is the time to enjoy it. Just take it game by game, enjoy it. They're going to be good. So just enjoy the ride. And if they end up being better than what you think, great. If they're still really good, but maybe not at Clemson's level, it's all right. I mean, the trajectory is going one direction. We know what that is. So if it's not this year, before long, if Matt keeps doing what he's doing, they're going to be in contention. So just try to enjoy the journey as best you can.
Is
Absolutely.
the college football playoff a possibility with the talent on this team? Sure. But, like, if that's your basis of whether or not you're going to think the season's successful, you might want to change your... Because this is a team that hasn't been to the ACC championship games since 2015. Like, they didn't make it last year. They were close, but they lost games that they could have won to get there. You know what I mean? So, like, if they just make that, I know that seems like such low-hanging fruit. Like, just make it to the ACC championship game. But, like...
But they've won one coastal title, to your point.
Exactly. It's not easy to
that.
do.
Right.
And
Well, the thing is, I think Greg, I don't know if I even told you, but at some point we're going to get together and do an over/under show, and one of them is going to be over/under wins, and I'm going to set it at 9.5, and
That's fair.
I think that's fair given the schedule, and we will see how it works out. But, the way college football works is you almost have to be perfect. You have to either be elite or perfect. And I still think Carolina's in the realm of they got to be perfect to win 10, 11, 12 ball games. And perfection's just not really relevant. Real quick before I go to break, Sherrell McMillan's going to join us here shortly for the basketball portion. See, I got guests coming. The high point of the season, Greg, for you covering.
For basketball?
No, we're in football still.
We're still in football. High point of the entire season.
Yep.
like even the fall?
High point of the 2021 season. Since September 6th, I think, was the Syracuse game, to whatever today is. High point for football.
Got to be Miami. And not that North Carolina smacked Miami the way they did, but to see Javonte and Michael Carter do what they did. I've seen some impressive individual performances, but for two teammates to do what they did is really fun. It's really fun to watch. And I mean, they did it against a good team. And that, for me, that was because you're coming off Notre Dame, and North Carolina's kind of knocking at the door, but they're not there yet. And they needed a big win, and that was a big win. And the way they did it was fun to watch.
The fact that we were in the press box and we were just going back, hey, can you look up this? When was the last time this was done? We spent like the entire fourth quarter and even a little bit of the third just looking up when the last time these numbers were happening. And we were like, what if it gets here? And it ended up as being like, this is the most by the duo ever. And it got there. It was just absurd.
I agree 100% with Miami. And I'll tell you this. Since I started working for Inside Carolina in 1998, I've sort of tempered my reactions to watching any sports. when Javonte hurdled the guy and then ran over number 3
And then
And
spun.
then it spun,
and
right?
then
Yeah.
spun and then went 15 more yards, I jumped and ran around the house.
Imagine he scored.
If he would have cut back and scored.
How
But
many times do we see that this week in the NFL draft?
I know that play right there made him hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I was
Yeah.
going to say the high point could not have happened yet. It could happen this weekend, or not even. It could happen Thursday.
Yeah. We'll see what happens with the draft. What's the low point? Real quick, in one sentence.
Football.
Virginia, Florida State. We agree on those.
Florida State, not Virginia. I think
Florida
Virginia
State.
was good. Florida State.
I agree there. That first half of Florida State was just – and that's what they can't do. That's what they cannot do if they want to play for the big-time games. I think an Orange Bowl berth again this year or whatever it is, whatever New Year's Six Bowl is available this year. And over 9.5 wins, I think, is a great season. And that gets Sam to New York, I think, most likely. Anyway, let me take a short break, talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Everybody get your refreshments, get your drinks, refills, use the restroom. We're going to have Sherrell McMillan after the break. But Johnny T-Shirt's a friend of this podcast, and they're certainly friends of Inside Carolina. And if you're a premium subscriber, like I always say, you get that 10% off your order. What they do is they send it to your house if you order it online, or they treat you right when you go on Franklin Street. I was in there this past weekend. Great folks. 2 young folks working there, very helpful, very cordial, and great customer service. So support Johnny T-Shirt as always. They're locally owned and operated, and they've got plenty of gear, anything you could ever want. I could use a few new shirts. This one I've had since probably whatever that style was, probably 95. But Johnny T-Shirt's your place to get it. We're going to take another break, letting the national guys pay the bills. We'll come back after the break. We'll talk a little basketball. And then later in the show, we're going to talk about basketball highs and lows and maybe some other stuff. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. This is Inside Carolina Live, Inside Carolina on the Beat Live, InsideCarolina.com, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. That's Gregory Hall and Greg Barnes. Sherrell McMillan will come in shortly. But before Sherrell gets here, a couple questions are on the board already for that. Greg, and I'll ask Sherrell when he joins us, do you think the roster is complete at the moment? Just your hunch. Sherrell will certainly know more than we will, but your hunch, is this roster complete?
I hope not. They desperately need a center. And whether that's a transfer or preferably that's a high school senior, they need a center desperately, and not for this year, of course, not for next year, but for the growth of the program. And I also think they probably need a true small forward, because my concern is kind of looking at how things right now. I think Hubert did a good job, getting the 2 kids that he did to really help next year. And if Bacot comes back, I think that team will be really good next year. But after that, things get dicey very quickly, and so he needs to make sure he's got some depth growing kind of behind the scenes, so that when Bacot leaves and when Caleb Love decides to leave and when Leaky graduates, and when the Oklahoma transfer graduates, they're not left scrambling. And I think
because they will be bare bones if he does not load up.
absolutely. And so I think those 2 positions are very key for Hubert moving forward here.
Let me ask you this, Greg, if you know, and I don't think it's been set. I know it hasn't been reported, but do we know Pat Sullivan's role for Carolina?
No, our understanding is that he's been in the NBA for 20 years, 18 years. So our understanding is that it's going to be an NBA player development type role. And maybe Sherrell can provide a little bit more insight there. But really, I think the idea is Roy Williams had so many incredible contacts in the NBA that all he had to do was pick up the phone and he could call 20 to 25 GMs after the season and say, hey, where do you think my guys are going to be? So he had a pretty good base of information to provide his players in their all-season meetings. Hubert doesn't have those ties, or at least not to that extent. And so I think bringing in a guy like Pat, who has so much NBA experience, he's coached a lot of different places, He's been in this type of role. He'll be a valuable asset there. And I think if you want to make a kind of a parallel, it's the Daryl Moody, Sparky Woods type deal that Mac Brown has. Guys that have a background at the pro level and they can really help the young guys understand what they need to do to make the next step.
I know Auburn talk is frowned upon, but every time I hear the name Pat Sullivan, I'm going to think about the 1971 Heisman winner. Just throwing that out there.
You were there. You saw him play
I'm
live.
I told my mom, I was like, Mom, Pat Sullivan. She saw it. She was like, Pat Sullivan. She's like, UNC has a Pat Sullivan. I was like, yep, they do.
So man, Pat Sullivan was at Carolina. You know, he looks older than I do, at least.
It's hard to do.
I've aged a little better than Sullivan has. Sorry, Pat, if you're listening. Greg, pontificate a little bit on that sort of analyst role. You mentioned Moody and Sparky Woods for Mac. I mean, how does that work as far as NCAA guidelines, ACC guidelines, school guidelines? I mean, can Hubert, for example, hire whoever he wants to be in certain roles as long as they don't have more than 4 on the bench, for say?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Alabama football is the quintessential example because the way the bylaws work is you've got a set number of coaches. And at the college level, you've got head coach and you've got 3 assistants who can actually coach on the court during practice. And then you also have strength and conditioning coach who can do a lot of different things with the players throughout the year. But beyond that, there's really no limitations. They created a job kind of out of midair for Kendall Marshall the past couple of years. But as long as they're not actively coaching the players on the court, you can bring in as many analysts as you want, and they can do different things. And so I think Alabama, I don't even know how many. I mean, they had like 3 former head coaches as like analysts for them. Larry Fedora was an analyst to Tom Herman at Texas. And so you can bring in as many guys as you want. You can call them whatever. You got to pay them. And that's part of the issue. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't like what Alabama has done because they've got 20 of these guys on the staff and it's not a big deal to pay them $150,000 a year. Most programs can't do that. And so that's why a lot of these smaller schools think there should be limits, but currently there are no limits. So Hubert can hire as many guys like that as he wants, as long as they're not actively, coaching on the court.
Tommy, do you know the definition of the word pontificate?
I use it a lot. I should.
You just used it.
Share your thoughts. I know. Man, don't ask me. I thought we said we're not doing that kind of stuff. Sherrell, what's happening, man?
I had to.
How are you? How are things?
About to kick Gregory off this daggone podcast.
Pontificate?
He's calling out the he's calling out the host. Sherrell, the question to Greg was Pat Sullivan's role in the most recent hire. Do you have any idea other than sort of an NBA liaison type guy that Pat will be on Hubert's staff?
Yeah, I've heard nothing. I think anything I say would be speculation. So we need like a rampant speculation sounder, or like this is a rumor sounder that we played before. So yeah, so people are like, this is not a report. No, what I would assume that, yeah, he'd be kind of the NBA liaison.
I need a sign that says rumor.
Right,
rumor.
exactly. That he would be the person kind of helping with workouts and helping, with identification of players who, are first, second round, gathering that information, talking to scouts, getting them on campus, kind of getting together what those workouts might look like, all the stuff that's involved with, helping guys for the NBA, helping guys for the next level, helping guys get overseas, all that stuff. I would assume that's kind of what his role will be. But again, we don't know. That's just a guess based upon what he's been doing. It doesn't seem like he would hire somebody who has all this NBA experience and then have them not do kind of the NBA part of it. And I know just from talking to people over the years, the player development aspect of Carolina's program is one that, right or wrong, whatever you believe, has come under a good deal of scrutiny. So I think this is an attempt by Hubert Davis, if Sullivan is in the role that we kind of think, to help alleviate that.
That's a very interesting take and a point. And that seems to me, and Sherrell, correct me if I'm wrong. And by the way, I know what pontificate means, Gregory, and it fits your opinions perfectly. Pat Sullivan's role, Hubert's ability to address shortcomings in the program, whether it's stretch fours that can shoot with the Oklahoma transfer or getting Pat Sullivan. I mean, it seems like Hubert's attacked certain things head on that maybe were issues or perceived issues for the last however many years. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair, and I think I think those are probably the easiest things. Those are fixes that don't require a ton of change or a ton of adjustment. You find a guy who can hit threes from the four spot. Very simple. You start beefing up what is player development, whether that is, well, I don't want to speculate too much. You start beefing up player development, and talking about it, openly talking about it. I think that's an easy change too. So the stuff that he's done, I think, was definitely needed, but it's stuff that you can attack pretty quickly. Like when presidents say, in my first 100 days, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Probably, maybe Z they can't get accomplished and they know that, but they know they can get X and Y. So I think this is a situation where he probably saw a couple of things that were easy fixes and said, let me knock them out real quick.
And see, this is the thing. I understand it, but I feel like Hubert missed an opportunity here, and Roy Williams went to bat for him to get him this job. I get it. So there's incredible loyalty there. But when he comes out and says, I asked him specifically, but when he comes out and says the game has changed, but doesn't really provide examples, like he had the opportunity to say, look, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. This is what we're going to be moving forward. Not be critical of Roy, because Roy did what he did. He was incredibly successful doing it. But this is how this game has changed. This is how I'm going to address it. And I think if he would have just laid that out, then everybody would have been like, whoa, like, all right, like we're in business now. And not just at the local level, but nationally. I hate he missed that opportunity. And maybe as we get closer to the season, he'll be able to lay things out in those terms. But I think that's to your point, Tommy, I think that's an opportunity to say, look, I'm doing this, this, and this for this reason. Everybody pay attention because this is the new style of North Carolina basketball, even though we're rooted in the fundamentals and rooted in the Carolina way. So I kind of hate that we haven't seen that yet.
Sherrell, what's the likelihood, and I asked Greg this before you joined, what's the likelihood that Carolina's roster is complete at this very moment?
Yeah, I don't think it's complete. I think they're going to keep looking for players. I think if we've seen anything thus far from Hubert Davis is that, they're going to look for guys, whether it's in the transfer portal or whether it's guys who have decommitted or are looking elsewhere, or guys, like Efton Reed, who hasn't even committed anywhere yet. They're going to keep looking and trying to find players. And again, not to be repetitive, but, you don't have to be in the transfer portal until July 1st. So this could carry on for another, month or two, depending upon what the roster, if they sign anyone in between. We know they want another big, and we know that they are actively looking at shooters. So I think those two, if they find the right fit, they would definitely take them. So I don't think the roster is set. I think they would be okay going with what they have, but they are still trying to get a big and a shooter.
Do you build the roster with the anticipation of Armando Bacot going to the draft, or how do you balance that?
The draft in 2021 or 2022?
Yeah, like he's in the like that. He's not going to be back.
Yeah, I think they've got a good word that they kind of know what he's going to do. Of course, things can change. It's not a done deal until it's a done deal, as we always say. But I think if they really thought that there was a chance he was leaving, you would see them be much more aggressive for additional, big guys. And they haven't been that to our knowledge. Like, obviously they're doing things that we don't know about, but the stuff that we're tracking, there's not that level of aggressiveness with guys who could come in and be a primary big.
Interesting take. I mean, so how long has Hubert been hired? Less than a month still?
I think
It's
it's
crazy.
today. It's a month. He was introduced a month ago today, I believe.
No, Roy
retired on April 1st.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 weeks ago today.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Are we surprised, or I mean, how do we feel as a group here how the transition has been. And Sherrell, I'll start with you. I mean, like we can't even figure out how long ago it was. It's just been that kind of whirlwind. I mean, as far as coaching transitions, it's what the fourth one that Carolina's had in since the '60s. How do we feel about it, Sherrell?
Um,
How does your expertise feel about it?
I think it was there were good, like everything. There were good moments and kind of bad moments. I think I know what he intended to say when he said, we want Carolina guys. I think he meant it, but I also think that he probably thought his staff was intact, as Greg has said, and that's one of the reasons you go that aggressively and say that out loud. So I think that maybe is something that was a little non-seamless because even though two of the coaches that he has as assistant coaches were coaching with him last year, it still felt a little strange, and it took a little while. It felt like to get kind of the assistant coaches, the bench roles set. I think it took 8 days, 8 or 9 days for them to be officially announced. Maybe long. I think it's actually longer than that. Maybe it's closer to 2 weeks for them to be officially announced. So that is kind of uneven. Um, from a roster continuity standpoint, I think people forget what Carolina is bringing back just because of what they lost. I mean, they lost the big guys, frankly, all of them except for Armando, more than likely. But there's a lot of talent coming back on this team. And I think that's been overlooked just because of all the transition. So he's got that going for him in the transition. I think he's in a better situation maybe than some people in the past. I would say, especially Matt Doherty, even though that season went really well, Matt Doherty's first year, I still think that Hubert is in a better situation overall, just because of the way college basketball is and what he's likely to have back. Um, so there's that. And then, some of the other stuff, the recruiting stuff, I think he's done a pretty decent job. I mean, from day one, he showed the aggressiveness. And again, for me, that's been the most illuminating thing over this last 3 weeks is just how aggressive they've been. And they've had some pretty shrewd, I would say, recruiting moves over those 3 weeks that show kind of they mean business. So I think if you're a Carolina fan, that's a good thing to see. Uh, and then just trying to finish out these two spots. So I would say overall pretty good. There wasn't a lot of change that took place as far as personnel. I mean, you kept three guys and then you brought in three guys essentially right now is what's happened. So that made it a little more seamless. But I think the initial we're going to hire the initial names we heard, I think maybe downgrade the grade just a little bit because of how aggressive he was in saying, we want Carolina guys because he thought he had the staff kind of wrapped up. So, I would say a solid B, I think. I think he's done about as good as a job as you could hope under the circumstances.
Greg, what do you think? You're usually the tougher grader of the bunch, I think. And I tend to agree with Sherrell. I mean, the man just got hired to coach Carolina. And whether or not folks believe it, Carolina is still Carolina. And so it's a pretty big deal. And I think he's done I agree with Sherrell. I think he came out a little strong in the presser on a couple things. The player that transferred, I think that was a little aggressive as well. But anyway, Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do think that some inexperience showed in that opening press conference, which is, I mean, this is the guy who only has 9 years of assistant coaching experience. That's that's part of it. I mean, how many times did he have a sit down press conference with media? I can't think of one. And so for him to go on that stage, I thought that was fine. I agree that his aggressiveness on the recruiting trail, I was a little bit skeptical there. And the fact that he took that approach and made some decisions very quickly bodes well. And as I mentioned earlier, Roy really set him up to have a good year next year. And provided Bacot does come back, that team can be really good. Now it's going to take coaching to get them up to a level where maybe they can compete, for the ACC title and to make a deep run in March. But they're starting at a good spot. So because of that, he really has a year to learn the job. And so I think every little move that we see, we're going to get to grade him, knowing that his first year is going to be pretty smooth just because of the talent on hand. But because you are going to lose a lot of talent next year, how he handles certain things and how he builds the program and develops the program, how he recruits, how he kind of lays the framework for future recruiting classes, that's going to tell us a lot more. So I think right now, I think a B is fine. But I think we're going to be able to have a much better perspective of how he can actually handle this type of program a year from now, because I fully expect this team to make the NCAA tournament. And I don't mean this negatively, but I think a lot of guys can come in as head coach and make that happen. So it's really what he does between now and then is going to be able to tell us, okay, well, how much has he actually solidified the foundation? How much has he actually helped this program take a step forward into the modern era? And again, this time next year, we'll have a very good understanding of what kind of foundation this program is on moving forward.
Yeah, let's be clear. Roy Williams didn't leave Hubert Davis empty-handed, but nobody left anybody as well as Dean Smith left Bill Guthridge.
Right.
I mean, that's the standard, and we see how that played out. I mean, Gregory, you feel free to jump in, but I'm rolling. Sherrell, the two additions, and I know, and this is the On the Beat podcast, and I much appreciate Sherrell from Coast to Coast fame with Joey Powell and Sean Moran joining us. But people have asked, somebody on the message board asked, are the two that they've received in the portal, McCoy and Manick, and I know you've talked about it on that podcast, but for folks that haven't listened, I think Manick's a home run. Is McCoy?
It depends on what the grading scale is. If someone who doesn't need 15 shots a game, and someone who's not going to require being the star, and someone who is going to do dirty work and be a good team player, if you like that and you want somebody in that role, then yeah, he's a home run because that's what he is. He's someone who is going to be a great, I think, six man, maybe his first year, and then who has a potential to start, as I guess it would be his junior year, his second year at Carolina, which would be his fourth year overall, even though he'd still have more eligibility left. Like the whole thing is crazy now. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would say a home run, but he's a very solid, good player, a foundational player on which you can build a program. And again, not to be repetitive, but college basketball is changing. Just it's not going to be the way it used to be. There's a recruit in 2023 who Carolina, we thought eventually he would definitely play at Carolina, and he's talking about the G League already. That's just the way it's going to be now. So you have to adjust your expectations to say, just because Carolina doesn't sign a top 15 or top 10 guy doesn't mean that they're not going to be competitive. There's going to be a different brand of player that's going to be in demand now. The types of players like Justin McCoy. So just imagine in 2 or 3 years if they're able to keep just let's say 4 guys from this group who are coming in next year. So say Dontrez Styles and DeMarco Dunn and Justin McCoy, RJ Davis and Kerwin Walton are still at Carolina in 2 or 3 years. That's going to be hard to beat because they're going to be experienced. We know that they have some talent, and Kentucky and Duke and Kansas and all these other schools aren't going to be bringing in, these top, these classes with 5 top 10 players or 5 top 20 players anymore. I think that era is gone. So you just have to readjust your expectations a little bit to understand that just because a player is a top 60 now, you have to kind of redo the math. Top 60 with 3 years of experience might be a top 30 now because so many players are going to be bypassing college, I think, moving forward.
Justin McCoy's offensive rating was 107.7, which would have been 4th on UNC last year. Small sample size, and he didn't play a whole lot, but just for some perspective, he would have been the 4th most efficient offensive player as far as offensive rating per Ken Palm on UNC's team last year.
And Carolina needs guys you can rely on to be consistently solid, if that's the thing. Before we get to the sort of the superlatives and the bad things from this past season, Sherrell, and I know we don't know, and we've said this over and over, but from what we know now, what does Hubert Davis's Carolina team, who do they look like on the court? Is it 4 out, 1 in? I would assume it's got to be, given if Bacot comes back. But I mean, give me some sort of way to wrap my head around what Carolina basketball might look like next year. And you
Yeah,
can't say I don't know.
I know it's frustrating for people, but we just don't know. I mean, the line I keep getting from people who have talked to them is a renovated, if Carolina basketball is a building, they're renovating the building and adding new fixtures and, stainless steel appliances and granite and all that crap. So, I mean, that's kind of the analogy that we've been given. So I would think that to mean, based upon that and the things that he said publicly, would be more spacing, a little more, pick and roll. Sean May talked about it in his interview with Jones and Adam, more pick and roll, more spacing, more shooting, and then more NBA concepts. What that means for the Carolina program. They run a good amount of pick and roll last year. I think people just don't realize what it looks like. You ask Adrian Atkinson how much they run fist, which is their late clock, pick and roll play, which they did a pretty good amount. So I think you're still going to see some of the Roy Williams staples, but just with a couple of wrinkles in there. And I do think they're going to run. I do think Hubert, just again, hearsay, speculation, rumor, play the sounder. What he wants to do is definitely get up and down the court is what we've been hearing. So I think it'll look similar, but you shouldn't expect it to look exactly the same. And a part of that is I don't know if rebounding will be emphasized the way it was under Roy Williams. So when Carolina doesn't win the rebounding battle, everybody doesn't need to freak out because it's going to be different. Maybe there's a game where they take 35 threes, which is not very Carolina like over the last 18 years. So everybody doesn't need to freak out. It's going to be somewhat different. But the basics I think will still be there, which are the break and the concepts, trapping out of timeouts, some of those things that we're used to, the lobs, the elevator screens, that kind of stuff will still be there. It's just going to be tweaked a little bit.
Yeah,
So-
and I think to expand on that a little bit, Tommy, Hubert's going to do the traditional North Carolina things, right? But if you look at who he played for, Dean Smith, what did Dean do differently than Roy? And Sherrell hit on a few of them there. Dean didn't emphasize rebounding the way that Roy does. I mean, that was the foundation of what Roy Williams wanted to do. Everything began with rebounding. And that's how we get into the whole traditional big conversation year in and year out. Dean was much more versatile in his defensive sets. He wasn't afraid to throw zone out there sometimes or trap and those kind of things. Roy has always been, he'll do man to man 99% of the time if he can. And every once in a while, you'll see him mix some things up. And then there's also tempo. Roy pushed it at a rate that Dean never really did. But when you kind of get into you point into the passer and you get into the importance of teamwork and defensive strategy and what you're trying to accomplish with a secondary break and all these kind of things, I mean, that is North Carolina basketball. And so Hubert's got to put his own stamp on there. But I do think you may see a little bit of a transition back to some Dean Smith options. I would like to see this again. This is me. This is not anything that I've been told. But you would like to see more creativity defensively than what Roy did. I think Roy was stubborn in what he wanted to do, and a lot of it had to do with rebounding. He thought that if you play man to man, your guy, your player knew who he was supposed to block out, and that's very simple. And that was the basis for it. He never thought his teams blocked out worth a flip when they played zone. So I would like to see some changes there. The tempo aspect, I think everybody moves a lot quicker these days. So while that's important, I don't think it's what it was 10 or 15 years ago. So you can get creative there. And then, of course, the spacing. And with a guy like Manick, certainly he can play inside. But his ability to move out and give you an extra three-point shooting opportunity guy, that frees up some space for Caleb and Anthony Harris and RJ to really get into the paint and make some things happen. So I think we have a kind of an idea of what it's going to look like, but like Sherrell said, we won't know until we actually see it. And that's the fun part. We'll really break down every single game next November and December and January like we haven't in a long, long time.
Just to see what's going on. I mean, it's going to be. I think it'll be significantly different. Go ahead.
what I'm interested in finding out is kind of more how practices are run, because there's nothing more I can add than what Sherrell and Greg just said as far as what expectations and what Hubert could do and things like that. But talking to the JV guys, I don't know if it'll change just based on practice length and things like that, but they said that Hubert never really made them run after practice as far as getting in conditioning, and he kind of believed more about getting your conditioning in during the practice. And if a warm-up drill wasn't done right, they would spend 30 minutes of the hour and 15-minute practice just doing the warm-up drill until it was perfect. So it'll be interesting to see how those things kind of change when coaching varsity, and that's just something I'm looking forward to trying to figure out how those work and things like that.
Absolutely, it's fascinating.
I was going to say with you talk about four out, one in. I mean, go back to the '93 championship team. I mean, George Lynch was the 4. I mean, he's a 6.5 maybe guy playing the 4. I mean, and then the next year or 2 years after that, Jerry Stackhouse at 6'6" is playing the 4 for UNC. So it's not something that I would say is revolutionary or new. Coach Smith was doing it 25, 30 years ago, and probably even before I can really remember back in my time. I think Kevin Madden might have played some 4 at some point back in the day. Because the guy was so jacked. But anyway, I mean, so I think to Greg's point, you might see Coach Davis lean on some of the things he learned from Coach Smith. You go back and look at those teams. I think Rick Fox played some 4 with Hubert Davis back in the day. They had bigs. They had Salvadorian Chilcutt and Eric Montross and, rest in peace, Cliff Rozier. But, they didn't play them all together all the time. They did sometimes, but it was a lot of George Lynch. There was times when Brian Reese played the 4. Hubert was gone by then. But I guess to the point is that he's seen teams play with a big and then maybe not what 4 out is now, but with a big and then, 2 forwards and 2 guards. So it's not something that's going to be new to him, dating back 25, 30 years. So I'll be interested to see that. And then, it's funny. If y'all go back and watch some of those games from the late 80s and 90s, I would be fascinated to see what Coach Smith would do with how the games are played today. Because every time I watch an old Carolina game or old Kansas game or even old Duke game or Kentucky, there are no ball screens. There's no high ball screens. It does not exist. And so it's all motion. It's all like 12 guys, 12. I'm thinking the wrong sport. It's all 10 guys like within 8 feet of the basket, and they're just screening each other, and everybody's posting up and everybody's cutting, and there's 45 seconds on the shot clock. It looks like an entirely different sport.
And you couldn't carry the ball. You couldn't make contact with the guards.
Right. I mean, it's so weird. So I said all that to say, now we're talking about spacing and giving guys room to be them and all that good stuff. It's not going to help anyone more than Armando Bacot and Caleb Love, I don't think, on this particular UNC roster. Because I think one of the things we saw with Caleb last year is that he could get by his man, sometimes he couldn't, but sometimes he would get by his man and there would just be, either wouldn't be room to finish or, kind of one of the bigs would bring their man into him and he just hit a brick wall. It might look like he got fouled and he would turn the ball over. I think this year you'll see someone like Manick or McCoy, instead of being there kind of on the block, they'll be out in the corner or the top, giving him more space for lobs to Bacot. And then, of course, Bacot is going to have a lot of room, I think, in the middle to kind of do his thing. So the Manick sighting was huge for UNC for a variety of reasons, but mostly I think because of how it frees up Caleb Love and Armando Bacot, because I do think those are going to be their go-to guys next year. Those are the guys that if they play well, that the team can do something.
Gregory,
Does bringing on Brady Manick helps UNC as a whole? Does it help or hurt specifically Kerwin?
I think it helps Kerwin. I think it helps everybody. I don't see the downside, especially offensively. I think it helps Leaky offensively. I think it helps Kerwin offensively because just last year, how many times we talk about it? If you stop Kerwin, who else is going to make a shot?
Good point.
And so this year you would expect some growth from Caleb, some growth from RJ Davis, some growth from Anthony Harris, some growth from Leaky, some growth from Puff. And then you have Kerwin. If he can just do what he did last year, he's going to have a lot more open looks because you're not going to be able to, when he's in that pick and roll, you're not going to be able to, just come down hard on him with, two or three guys. Because if you do, here's this guy from Oklahoma who's made 230 some threes in his career wide open in the corner. So there's going to be, penalties, so to speak, for teams who want to attack Walton. Now, defensively, that's a different conversation. But I think at some point, you have to play to your strengths. And I think this North Carolina's team's strength is going to be offensively.
So it would be Kerwin at the 2 and then Manic at the 3 if they played on the floor together, and or they would just both kind of fluctuate, you know what I mean? Fluctuate a little bit.
No, I think it
Slide
would
them
be
down 3-4.
Kerwin at the 3. I don't know about that one.
Yeah, so I wasn't.
I
don't think you could defend that.
Well, see, the thing is, though, started before last season, we were like, Kerwin at the 2. We don't know about that one. So maybe we're not giving him enough credit. Maybe he can start at the 2 or the 3. But all of it is guesswork, I think. I think you can kind of pencil in Armando Bacot because, we expect him back. And if he's back, he's going to be the best big on the team.
Yes.
I don't think someone like Manic transfers from Oklahoma with a year of eligibility to not start. And then after that, Caleb has the upper hand, but who knows? We don't know what Hubert Davis wants. So it's hard to project, a lot, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with this is if Manic is the outside shooter we think he is, we know what Kerwin can do. Caleb's going to be a lot better as a sophomore. And you've got Bacot in the middle. So who's at the 3? And if you've got shooters at the 2 and the 4, Leaky's the kind of guy you want at the 3, right? The glue guy who can do everything. So that's going to be a great conversation for the boards to have.
Is it going to be great? Is it?
Leaky at the 3.
It's going to be conversation.
No, it's going
to be. Hubert's going to play Leaky.
Well, it's going to be the same thing like we said last year when me and Greg were on these podcasts with Tommy. We said, folks, Andrew Playtech is going to play. Whether you like it or not, he's going to play. And it's going to be the same thing with Leaky this year. It might not be 31 minutes a game leading the team in minutes, but he's going to play. So the sooner everyone can come to grips with that, I think the better, because there are things that are good about him. And I think the way the roster is positioned now will actually help highlight the things he does well and kind of hide the things that he doesn't. So, we'll see, but he's going to play. So just the sooner everyone accepts it, the better.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you just said. And really over the last 10 minutes, you guys have just been laying it all out there. If Leaky doesn't have to be relied on to score, he can do everything else that he's can do. And I think Manic gives that. I think Bacot's going to be fantastic in this offense. I think if he can stay out of foul trouble, you're looking at an 18 and 12 type season for him or more. But that will be the question: is who's the second shooter? Is it Kerwin Walton? Is it does R.J. Davis develop into that? I wonder where Anthony Harris plays. It'll be a lot to talk about as we go on.
To your point about Leaky with scoring, but if there's more space in the lane, we know he likes to drive. And so he might be more successful at that without a crowded lane. You never know. So
fascinating. Sherrell, let me ask you one more question before we get to the end of this podcast. Hubert's been on the recruiting trail hard, and we talked about that earlier, and he's been aggressive. How does Hubert Davis's name and paired with the Carolina name, what kind of weight is that carrying out there on the trail before he's even coached his first game?
I think we'll have a better answer, once things really get, back in order in June and July. But the players that we've talked to, most of them were predisposed to like Carolina a little bit already because they've either offered or had to have conversations with Coach Williams. But to a T, they all immediately like, oh, he's such a great guy. I love him. There's one player, I can share this now, Deontay Green from Asheville, who is a 6'9" power forward. He's the top ranked player in North Carolina in the 2022 class. And he's just like, oh, I love him. He's great. He calls me when he's, going fishing. He called me during the first week and was just like, I needed a day off because everything was so crazy. So I called you and I met my son's soccer, just that kind of talk. There's another player, Justin Taylor, who's up in Virginia, who has a Carolina offer. He talked about how he watched the press conference and he was so, kind of bought into Hubert's message. But too, just every single player we talked to and parent we've talked to thus far has said just how great of a person he is and how down to earth he is and just how nice he is. So that is something that doesn't mean that he's a great recruiter. It just means that he's connected with people in that way, which can help him be a great recruiter. I think the jury is still out on all this stuff, but it's a good start, and that's all you can hope for.
Absolutely. Win the parents. You can often win the child. Gregory, superlatives. Let's go with low point of Carolina's basketball season. Cannot be Roy Williams' retirement. Putting you on the spot.
First round exit to Wisconsin. Just how poor that game went and how, I mean, we talked about contrasting styles entering the game and just the magnitude at which Wisconsin overpowered UNC with the style of play that they wanted to play. So not only the first round exit, which was Roy's first round loss and all yada yada yada, but just the way they lost, especially considering that they were playing, I think, their
Was
best.
it surprising?
What?
Was it surprising though?
I mean, I think
Was
UNC was
that
playing
game
some of their
surprising?
best basketball of the season in the ACC tournament leading up to that point. So to me, it was surprising. As far as now, whether or not Wisconsin, like obviously Wisconsin was going to give them a run for their money, but, and I'm not saying they should have won the game, but just, and I wasn't necessarily expecting a win going in because Wisconsin's a good team, but UNC was playing good basketball in the ACC tournament. Yes, they ended up losing to Florida State, but that was a hard fought game and they came back. So that's the low point for me, is just the way that they lost, considering they and I know they felt like they were playing some of their best ball too. So
Sherrell, low point.
Marquette. It's just so you can't explain why that happened. There's no justification for it. They were a better team. Marquette had not played well. They just beaten Louisville by 45 points. They had a week off and just didn't show up. Thought they were going to go out there and we're big bad Carolina and we're going to win, and it didn't work for them. So to me, that was the most disappointing thing because they really had an opportunity, as Greg has mentioned several times, to play themselves out of, a game against someone like Wisconsin, into a 7-10, matchup, which, I think it showed that maybe they could have done more had they not ran into a team like Wisconsin. So I don't want to say that they played Wisconsin because they lost to Marquette, but it definitely was one of the things that led to it.
Greg,
Yep, agreed.
keep it simple. High point, Gregory. You're muted.
the
And
two
you knew
getting
I was
hard.
coming back to you.
I
Go
mean, I
ahead.
don't know. Maybe you're doing like a snake thing, going back to Greg. Probably both Duke wins. I mean, I know Duke wasn't great, but considering the year UNC had the year before, I'd say sweeping Duke.
Sherrell.
I would say the Notre Dame game because you thought you were seeing a preview of what the Carolina team was going to look like in 2021, 2022, between Walker Kessler playing so well and Caleb and RJ hitting shots and the big guys dominating. You just thought, okay, this is the UNC team that makes a run next season after maybe a disappointing loss in the NCAA tournament this year. So that was kind of I think that to me that was the high point.
Greg.
January, just because North Carolina won 6-7, and as Sherrell says, there were stretches in there where North Carolina looked really good, and the only loss was at that point in time at Florida State, and Florida State was playing like the best team in the ACC at that point in time, even though Scotty Barnes did not play in that game. But even though North Carolina was not perfect and had some flaws, we saw that team have a lot of fight. And we saw that early in the year, but it really kind of came together in January. And even though they were a flawed team, I really thought they would be able to build on that. And that kind of gets you into some of the games that we saw in February, just kind of head scratchers. I mean, the Clemson game. I mean, that was hard to watch, and I was there in person. And then, of course, Marquette for all the reasons that Sherrell mentioned. So it felt like that team was building and growing the way that Roy Williams teams typically do in January, and then they just kind of ran out of gas after that. But they looked really good in January, and I think they gave a lot of people a lot of hope and optimism.
Last bonus question, Sherrell. Biggest surprise this season, and it can be anything.
Biggest surprise this season. Yeah, just the freshman guards shot so poorly overall for the season. I think when I say freshman guards, I'm not including Kerwin Walton. I want to make that distinction. Just thinking of RJ and Caleb, because those guys had proven that they were competent to good shooters in high school, and not just in high school, in AAU, at USA, at those big events with other really good players. So that really surprised me, because I thought they were going to be able to shoot better. You don't expect freshmen to shoot well, but I didn't expect them to be, where they were, which is the mid 20s and low 30s. So that was pretty surprising.
I do want to give Sherrell some credit here, though, because he, more than anyone else, cautioned that it's tough for guards to come in and shoot lights out from the get-go. We've seen it time and time again. And even though they shot probably worse than we thought, I think he did a very good job of laying the framework of don't get your hopes up too much in terms of shooting percentages.
Yeah, and it's crazy how we thought not having crowds might help.
Yeah.
And it did not.
And I was
Those guys.
to not give myself credit. I was super wrong about that. I thought I thought it was going to be much easier for those guys, and man, it was not. So, yeah.
Well, what a crazy year. Inside Carolina's been right there front and center, mostly Greg Barnes on site and Gregory Hall on site on games in Chapel Hill, and of course Sherrell covering all things basketball recruiting, all things scoop wise and all. It's just been, I've been doing it since 98, and you guys have been here for various years. I've never seen anything like the past 15 months that we've had, and hopefully we're through it and can get back to normal. I know, Sherrell, you mentioned on the Coast to Coast a couple weeks ago that it was the first time in 13, 14 months you had sat in the gym and watched some basketball. I mean, just
it was crazy.
hard to believe. And I'm not sure, everybody has asked, is this the most exciting time in Carolina sports in quite some time? With the excitement around the basketball team building, and then what Mac Brown's got going on, I think it's going to be quite an interesting offseason. But I want to give a shout out to everybody at Inside Carolina, but especially this crew right here: Gregory Hall, Greg Barnes, and Sherrell McMillan,
And
Luke Buxton, who's doing his thing on senior night. Got to give him credit, and Ross and Joey and Don and all those folks, and Michelle, Buck and Ben, and Jim Hawkins. If you like photos, Jim is your guy. But this has been the last scheduled On the Beat Live. Johnny T-Shirt's been our sponsor. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Gregory. That's Greg. That's Sherrell. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you again next time.